You may have noticed that large corporate interests are currently in the process of attempting to ruin everything good about our society. And you might have asked yourself, why? Why do they want to do this so badly? When we try to formulate answers to questions like this, there's a human tendency to overestimate the influence of sort of bad actors, to have an explanation that's rooted in bad people who've taken over our important institutions and are pursuing some sort of unfortunate agenda. And that often overlooks the role that structures play in leading to these bad outcomes. So today I want to argue that it's not actually that bad people control our corporations, but that the corporate form necessarily drives any persons immersed in it towards bad actions from a social perspective. And the reason for that is simple. The corporate form divorces ownership and operation of the enterprise. And that has both social and economic ramifications. On the social side, operational decisions in a situation where ownership and operation are separated are made divorced of their natural social context. The people who are making decisions about how enterprises should be run aren't forced to grapple with the consequences for real human beings that those decisions bring about. And on the economic side, the separation of ownership and operation leads to a normalization of an exceptional economic circumstance, which is the presence of economic profits. We'll talk about the social first, and we'll talk about the economics. Let's get to it. Probably the best example of the pernicious social consequences of divorcing operational decisions from human context is the takeover of housing by private equity, specifically the takeover of mobile home parks. There's a great Last Week Tonight segment on it, but the gist of it is that historically, mobile home parks have been owner-operated. So you have a big plot of land and people pay a land lease and they move their mobile homes on top of that. And then they pay rent on their plot on a monthly basis. The problem is that a mobile home is a depreciating asset. And despite the name, it's not actually all that mobile. Once it's in position, it's very difficult and costly to remove it. And so what private equity firms have realized is that's a captive market. If they swoop in and take over a mobile home park, then they can raise rents to whatever amounts that they want. They can completely swallow up the disposable income of everybody in the park, and these people are stuck. And so you have a situation where, historically, because of owner operation, people didn't jack up the rents, because if Linda runs the trailer park and she's in the office every day and she knows the circumstances of all the people who live in the park, she knows that when she makes that call, she's going to have to look somebody in the eyes and say, hey, I'm destroying your life because I want to buy some new stuff. That doesn't work on a human level because it's an owner-operated situation, because the owner is on site, has local knowledge of the consequences of their decisions. But once Linda wants to retire and private equity takes over, well, the person who makes that decision never has to look in the eyes of a human being whose life they're destroying. All that they do is look at, I get to buy myself a new supercar or a new yacht because I am exploiting this captive market, which is, of course, exploiting human beings whose circumstances don't allow them to get away from me. They don't have to confront that, so they can make that decision. On the economic side, the separation of ownership from operation leads to the normalization of what are called economic profits. So if you're talking about Steve's Bar and Grill on the corner, Steve owns it, Steve operates it. After Steve pays for labor, for the lease, for the inputs to his business, all Steve needs to make is enough money left over to compensate Steve for his time. And we set that in economics, the value of that time, by Steve's second best option, or the opportunity cost of his labor. So if he's operating his bar and grill, he's not getting a job somewhere else. Whatever his second best option is, that sets the floor for how much money Steve needs to make in order for it to make sense for him to remain in business. So let's say Steve's next best option is 60 grand. If there's 60 grand left over after he's paid off all of his costs, then he's good. He wants to continue operating his bar and grill. That is the normal profit of Steve's Bar and Grill. If Steve just turns out to be an excellent manager and is able to bring in the sort of traffic that he needs to, say, have $100,000 left over after paying for everything, then Steve now has $60,000 in normal profit and $40,000 in what's called economic profit. That $40,000 is an exceptional circumstance according to economic theory. One of the first results you get to when you study perfect competition is, in a healthy, competitive market, economic profits should be driven to zero. Nobody makes economic profits if we have a healthy, competitive market. And what that means is, when you corporatize the bar and grill, now we have Corpo Bar and Grill, it still needs to be operated. So we still need somebody to do Steve's job. So if we're ever going to pay the shareholders for financing the establishment of Corpo Bar and Grill, we need economic profits. And so as soon as a given industry has become corporatized, what that means is we can't have a healthy competitive market anymore. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to pay out the shareholders, which means the corporate form is fundamentally antithetical to healthy competitive markets. So anytime somebody tells you about the wonders of the free market and how it's going to fix everything, that's not true if the market is populated by corporate entities, because corporations have to destroy competition in markets. Corporations have to find a way to generate that economic profit that they need to pay off their shareholders. And they do that primarily through scale. If you look at the history of the corporate form was created to facilitate massive societal scale enterprises. If you need to set up like a trading organization that's going to operate half a globe away and run a colonial empire, then no single individual is going to have the capital laying around to capitalize that firm. And you can't have a mom and pop East India trading company. So there's no way to build up from a small scale to a large scale. You need to be large scale from the start. That's what a corporation is for. And so when we're dealing with the corporatization of previously owner-operated small-scale sorts of firms, by scaling up, they managed to generate those economic profits. So Corpo Bar and Grill can't operate on the same cost structure as Steve's Bar and Grill. It just doesn't work. There's not going to be any economic profit available. So what do? Well, instead of operating one location, you operate 40 locations. And once you operate 40 locations, instead of having to have a couple of cooks in the back in the kitchen, you get rid of the kitchen. You have a single prep kitchen that services all 40 of your locations. Now your square footage for your storefront has gone down. Your labor costs go down because you can have a smaller staff. You have more efficient use of the kitchen facilities that you do pay for because they're running around the clock creating pre-made meals that can be heated up at Corpo Bar and Grill. So as you can distribute the fixed costs of, say, running a kitchen over a greater and greater and greater production run, your average total costs go down, which means your cost structure is now changed such that you can generate, as long as you're able to continue selling at the same prices that Steve's Bar and Grill was selling at, Corpo Bar and Grill can now generate exceptional economic profits, and they can send those back to their shareholders. The problem with that, of course, is once they do that, they can also then begin to lower prices to undercut all of the mom and pop owner-operated competition and drive them out of business. And then we run into the real problem, because once you are the only employer in a given area for a given specialized set of skills, you can start putting downward pressure on wages. Once you are the only buyer for all of the supplies that go into running this sort of business, or you're, like a major anchor customer for the suppliers, then you can start putting downward pressure on the prices that you're willing to pay there. And so once a corporation scales up, scale then enables market power. We get rid of competition, and we get into a situation where the large-scale corporation can begin to extract surplus value from all of the markets that they enter into. We're going to have to do some charts and graphs here. Hopefully you've seen a supply and demand chart. We've got our downward sloping demand curve. We've got our upward sloping supply curve. And when you look at these, they're generally presented as these sort of abstract mathematical entities, but you want to think of these as actually supply and demand schedules, that every dot along these curves represents an individual On the demand curve, each dot is a person who has a specific willingness to pay for a good or a service. And on the supply side, each dot represents a specific supplier who has determined by their cost structure, a minimum that they're willing to accept to supply that good or service. And when you look at the equilibrium price and quantity as set by the market, what you realize is at the market prevailing price, most participants in the market are actually buying for less than they were willing to pay, or supplying at a higher price than they were willing to supply for. And so the difference between the prevailing price and a buyer's willingness to pay is the consumer surplus. And the difference between the prevailing price and a seller's willingness to supply is the supplier surplus. What happens when corporations get to large scales is that they can then begin employing all sorts of tactics to make sure that when they interact with these markets, they are only selling at exactly the willingness to pay of each consumer, and they are buying labor at only the exact willingness to supply of each labor supplier. Or they're buying their inputs at the exact willingness to supply of each supplier. And so they can extract the surplus value, which is usually under an owner-operated dominated market system, shared between the buyer and seller. Everybody comes away from the interaction feeling like, yeah, I got a good deal. I'm better off than I started. To a situation where everybody who deals with the corporation feels like they just barely avoided getting ripped off. And it's a very different dynamic when the huge corporate entity is able to then capture all the consumer surplus for everything that they sell and capture all of the producer surplus for their labor market and their suppliers. Then all of this surplus value, which is the origin of the wealth of nation in a society, it's the actual experiences that make us feel collectively well off. All of that is now flowing into the corporations and into the hands of shareholders, which is how we end up in the situation that we're in, where the top 1% owns basically everything, and it gets worse every day. We all feel the squeeze because the corporate form's requirement of exceptional economic profits forces corporate entities to undermine competition in markets, to extract consumer and producer surplus from all of the markets that they interact with, and funnel all of the surplus value that makes a rich nation feel rich to the people who live in it, funnel all of that directly back to the shareholders. So, it's not that good to have a society where all of the markets are dominated by corporate enterprises. What do? We should encourage owner operation wherever possible. We should restrict the corporate form primarily to those spaces where it is actually useful. If you have an enterprise that has to be at a massive scale right from the start, there's no possibility of scaling up over time. And especially where you have, for example, natural monopolies and whatnot that make it so that competitive markets wouldn't exist anyway, then yeah, the corporate form is a very useful tool for society to promote large-scale enterprises. But outside of that, we should prefer owner-operation. We can do that through regulation of markets. For example, why do corporations need to be able to buy single-family housing? Doesn't make any sense. We can do that through changes to the tax code that advantage owner-operated firms against corporations, for example, by raising the corporate tax and raising the capital gains tax so that the value to shareholders of trying to turn every market that exists into a corporate-dominated market so they can extract values from captive markets is just simply reduced. If the capital gains tax and the dividend tax are at a certain threshold, then it doesn't make sense to buy up every mobile home park in the country. So we can take steps through policy means to advantage owner-operated firms versus corporations in places where owner-operation is possible and reasonable. And we can get back the experience of interacting with markets in a way where everybody feels like they got a good deal, where consumers get consumer surplus, suppliers get supplier surplus, and we don't have the entire surplus value of the entire economy accruing to the 1% who hold all the shares in all the corporations. So if you made it this far through a rant about why corporations ruin everything, you probably are going to enjoy the kind of content that I post around here. So why don't you stick around, hit subscribe, give me a like if you liked the video, and I'll see you next time.